Good morning and welcome to day 2 of GCAP 2024. Please give me a woo. I love having that command over people. I hope you all rested well and are ready for another stunning day of great talks, good food, networking and mingling. We did have a beautiful welcome to country yesterday, but I would of course love to acknowledge that we are here on what always was, always will be Aboriginal land, and extend my respects and welcome to any First Nation attendees today. If you weren't here yesterday, I am Sav Wolf. I'm the Manager of Events, Content and Communication for IGEA. I also manage the content and logistics of GCAP, so apologies if I have blown up your inbox in the past couple of weeks. I will be keeping things brief here today because there is so much content to go through and I personally cannot wait for it all. A reminder that our non-alcoholic social is on tonight at 5:30 on tonight. The halls of GCAP will be transformed into a low-key networking event with desserts, mocktails, and fun demos to play over in the Meet to Match space. These games were curated by Indie BYOG and are sure to have something for everybody. If you have stopped by the Screen Australia Lounge yesterday, please do be sure to do so again today, as they have a rotating cast of games, so you'll have fresh new demos to play. We could not bring you GCAP without the support of our sponsors, who are all committed to supporting the Australian games industry. I'm going to take a big breath for this one, so bear with me. Thank you to Creative Victoria, Screen Australia, Exola, EA Fire Monkeys, Big Ant, City of Melbourne, Hipster Whale, Screen Queensland, Sledgehammer Games, Vic Screen, City of Port Phillip, South Australian Government, LDB, Metric Computers, NBN, Playside, Screen New South Wales, Screen Tasmania, Ultimate Studios, Unreal Engine, Cam Rogers Legal, Gameloft, Paragon Interactive, Riot Games, and Screen West. I ran out of breath yesterday in the closing keynote. I'm going to be the next Eminem. Most of you showed up yesterday for my housekeeping, but if it is your first day, here is the recap. In an emergency, please notify an IGEA team member immediately, be that medical, fire, or other, and we will escalate. In the event of an emergency, one of 2 alarms will sound. If it is just a beeping, then that's an alert, so stay put until MCEC tells you what to do. If it is a whoop whoop, then that is the sign to evacuate immediately. MCEC wardens will direct you to the safest evacuation point and let you know when it is safe to return. If an IGEA team member is not available immediately, please contact one of our many volunteers who you would have spotted already in the purple shirts, and they can get in contact with us straight away. If you are feeling at all unwell in any way, please do not remain at GCAP. In case of illnesses, we do have a refund policy found on our website, and we can assist you to ensure that you do not miss out. Please ensure you are abiding by the Code of Conduct, which you can find via the QR code on your badge. This goes to a link tree that also includes the map and schedule. If you do have any questions or concerns, myself and the IGEA team will be floating around during the conference, so please feel free to get in contact with us if you need us for any reason at all. We will be very happy to talk to you. So today, a GCAP veteran we haven't seen for many years, this next keynote is already beloved to many of you. An award-winning independent game designer and director based in Los Angeles and Tokyo, they have travelled a hell of a long way to be with us here today. With honours from the Peabody Awards, the Game Awards, Independent Game Festival, Game Developer Choice Awards, BAFTAs, and more, they can boast an extremely impressive history in games. Co-designer on best-selling RPG Hyper Light Drifter and director of OFK, a video game and pop music project in one, they're here today to share their honest and open experiences with you on making games at both a AAA and indie level. Please welcome Teddy Dief.
Hi. I'm just going to get the first order of business. Yeah! Okay, great. I'm going to start in a minute. I'm going to say so many words today, so this is the relaxing part. What's the best ice cream in Melbourne?
Coffee.
I asked for that. Okay, hi, let's go.
Fluffy torpedo.
Fluffy torpedo. I don't need this. Okay, thank you, Sav. That was wonderful, and thanks to GCAP for having me. This is going to be fun, deep breath. This talk's going to take us some places together, so I'm just going to jump in the least chill way possible. Today I want to talk to you about time. Time is the realest cost of making games. I often advise game devs who are negotiating their first deal with a publisher that they'll hear the word risk used a lot to describe money. And we're told that the people taking the risk are the ones paying for the game. And it's true that that is a meaningful risk. But I like to remind developers that time is the riskiest currency of all. You will never be able to recoup a minute of time. It's your most valuable resource, so how you spend it, that's everything. I like to block out and measure time a lot. Maybe it's the nature of my flow state when I'm working, or maybe it's my attention deficits, but I use a lot of timers to track little chunks of time, 5 minutes, 30 minutes, 2 hours, to help myself understand how I use time. This is how I plan and evaluate each year of my life. This is my 52-week layout that lets me see time on a large scale simply. So there's space for just 2 significant things each week, 104 things a year. If I can remember 100 meaningful things in a whole year, I'm happy. And I don't even really fill it. So much of a game maker's time disappears into the nooks and crannies of the unpredictable games industry. Job searching, layoffs, burnout, pitching, project cancellations, studio closures. My career has felt like one cycle after another filled with these time gaps. Repeated loops of restarting over and over. In some ways it frustrates me, all the starting over, but in other ways it helps me to measure time. One of our GCAP themes this week is built to last, so I think it's constructive to talk about what persists when nothing feels like it does. This is a talk about my career, but more accurately, this is a talk about my time and how I've used it, lessons I've learned with it, and maybe a little insight into how to use yours. Maybe. Caveat, before I dive in, I just want to do my best to caveat. In the course of describing the ups and downs of my career, it's going to get a little negative here and there. I hope I can ask you to remember that I feel lucky to be here with you. I feel lucky to have a career that somehow puts me up here. And if I complain, I just want to leave space to A, allow my negatives to be valid, while B, acknowledging that I get to make games with my life, and for that I am immeasurably lucky. Okay? Okay, here we go. I am 40. Thank you. I lived. Let's see, I began playing games at age 5. I made my first video game at age 20. I entered the industry professionally at 23. So I've been making games for 17 years professionally. I'm going to dive into moments of this career and focus on the cracks between game development, where we're not necessarily doing development, but real events are happening that are just as much a part of the experience of making games as coding or making a 3D model. Before I get into what wasn't development, let's just get out of the way what I do when I'm making games. If you've heard of any of my work or me at all, you probably know me as this, or this, maybe, or more recently this, and sometimes unbearably this sort of stuff. Or at least that's what I want, because this is like more or less my Twitter bio in a better font. So these are the peaks, you know. Here are 2 videos, just to get a primer here, that make up about 7 years of my life together. me up, tear me down. Come apart, come around. Paralyzed, I rely on something bigger than this life. Crystal ball, show me all.
I miss my life, Carter.
All the ways I could fall. I rewind, I decide on something bigger than this life. I keep kidding myself, my lovers. I'm just like the others.
I take a piece of me that hurts, and I throw it away.
Fool's gold, still glows. Looks like the real thing. Once more with feeling.
Who's to say what will last?
Fool's gold.
I thought you had integrity.
I'm so jealous, man. To be able to just do the thing you want to be doing.
Once more with feeling. Okay. So quickly, on a deeper level, most people don't really know what I do because I'm a generalist. Like, what are the games that I do? Do I make games? Who knows? Let's find out. So I do game design, game feel, action combat, meta systems, narrative design, pretty broad there. Not level design is the shorthand for, I think. I do programming. I will admit, non-humbly, I'm like okay at that. Mostly Unity and GameMaker. I don't really talk about it a lot because it feels like a means to an end for me, but I do love it. I do writing, usually in screenplay format, writing dialogue. I also go deep into character development, plot structure, world building, and all that. I do direction. I build a team, I hire people, I try to give them ownership of the pieces of our game. I do little things like build prototypes to illustrate ideas. I do large things like storyboard sequences, and I try to care for people. And sometimes, rarely, I am a singer in games, or more regrettably, occasionally, an actor. For the sake of focus now, I'm going to spend most of my time with you today talking about the periods of my career from the Twitter bios stuff and ignoring the smaller bits, but I know it's important in any career talk to avoid this sort of thing. It's done, you know, finally someone's taking that guy down. It's dumb. Like, I don't like the geniusification of successful people. It puts an unreasonable pressure on young creatives, or anyone really, and it erases the people who helped these so-called geniuses. So first, let's talk about my early career, and then I'll pour tea about the games that maybe you've heard of. My first full-time job was as a New York City ad exec. I spent most of my time as a runner for various productions, and I got to be a production assistant for tons of TV, radio, and print ads. I got to see the insides of how creatives have to work in a monetized environment, which is to say, it's fraught. But this had nothing to do with video games, and I came to understand that half of my waking lifetime would be spent in whatever job I settled into, so I pushed myself to find one that I would love, and I started over in games. I leveraged my ad experience to get my first job at Gameloft, which I just 90 seconds ago learned is a sponsor today. So I was in sales. I flew from New York to Kansas City over and over to pitch our latest games portfolio to Sprint, who was a cell phone carrier. I tried and failed to move sideways into a game design job there. I was told I was a fit for game design, but there were no openings, so they fired me. Which is kind of fair, I guess, seeing as I told them I didn't want the job that I was doing. But it taught me a very important lesson. The asterisk is because Gameloft is not Disney, but fill in the blank with whatever company, right? Especially big ones, and double especially publicly traded ones. They're entities to make money. Amen. Inside those companies are people who should care for each other, of course. Everyone here in this room in a leadership position should work very hard to care for the people you're responsible for. You do your best to protect your people, while the priority of the company at some level is money. Because that's how capitalism is designed and functions for the most part. And it's just good to keep this in mind. Shortly after, I was violently fired from Gameloft, sorry, Gameloft, about which I am obviously not salty. I was admitted into the grad program at USC's film school. Conveniently, I had applied to film school because I just didn't have a first positive experience in game development, and I decided I would become a television writer, obviously. So I started over. And then a year later, I started over again. I transferred into the cinema school's game division. So I went back to games. I'd learned a lot about film and TV, but I just wasn't as steeped in that creative medium as I'd been in games. I'd never seen Citizen Kane, and I felt self-conscious about that every day. But not enough to watch Citizen Kane until, that's definitely the only reason that I switched back into games. But this restart took off quickly for me under incredible mentorship by faculty Tracy Fullerton, Richard LaMarchand, and Jeremy Gibson. I got a master's degree in games, which really meant that for 3 years I just made games over and over outside the bounds of capitalism, or at least shielded from it. I didn't have to sell anything to anyone. I learned applied programming. I'd been a computer science and music major back in uni, but I forgot all my programming when I went into advertising. But for me, applying code to something that I wanted to make, that's what got me to love it. I should confess, I paid for this time with a lot of student loans. Frankly, I was lucky that Hyperlight Drifter would bail me out from the debt I accrued doing this. But I got to be my own boss at age 25, and I had to learn how to be my boss. And then there's a joke in here about Gameloft that I'm going to skip. So during my master's, I actually was doing capitalism. I got my first paid job as a game designer, working part-time during school. I worked for these folks on a Pirates of the Caribbean MMO, and I started to learn how large company politics can influence game production. My teams were very good to me here and gave me a lot of opportunities to contribute and grow, but I saw how at best they were keeping the larger machine at bay to protect the work. In big environments and small indie ones, you spend a lot of time just protecting the work from outside forces. In my last summer break of grad school, I got my second paid game design job at Xbox, working on Kinect games. I tried my hand at new avenues of design and worked with some very smart people. Regarding my time, the biggest lesson I learned was insist on what you will become. And what I mean by that is I was still a fledgling designer, but I really was loving it. And when I began talking with Xbox about a job there, they actually approached me about becoming a producer. I'd been supporting a few teams in school on top of my design work, keeping schedules and managing tasks, which I guess earned me some attention. But I didn't want to be a producer. And I think one of my proudest moments was saying no to that and insisting that I wanted to grow as a designer, and then using my portfolio of student work to demonstrate that I could maybe do that. As my contract at Xbox finished, they called me into a meeting and offered me a full-time position. And that night, I went to the movies at the Bellevue Town Center in Bellevue, Washington, which is a big mall, with lots of stores. And I go there, and I'm sitting in the movie theater, and before the trailers is an ad for the mall. You know how they do that? And they're like, stores! I'm like, sick! Bowling! And then it ends, and it goes, Bellevue Town Center, everything you'll ever need. And I was like, oh no. And I felt scared. I felt like I needed other stuff than that. And somehow to me, this was like a representation of my situation at the moment. I just felt too young to take the job they were offering me. I felt like I wouldn't leave, and I needed to try something else. So I started over. And I chose to start my first full-time indie studio with my incredible USC classmate, Mike Sennett. Okay, so overdue here, I want to highlight that there is a ton of privilege underpinning my career. I took a lot of early risks because I felt that I was safe to. So while I didn't have a ton of disposable income, I was taking loans, I grew up around enough financial family support to make me feel that if I fell on my ass, I wouldn't end up on the street. I felt like somehow it would be okay, and so I could take the risk to turn down an Xbox job, to go back to LA, to go indie. It's always just worth being transparent over and over about this stuff because so many people are not, and so many independent artists I know spend a long time being very, in fact, dependent on others. Okay, cool. Okay, so we made it through the backstory portion of the talk. Now we're going to talk about some behind the scenes fun stuff. Hey, how is everyone? Are we good? Cool. I heard we get tea time after this. Cool. Let's take a 60-second intermission, but don't do anything or get up, so it's kind of a fake intermission. Let's listen to something I haven't shown publicly yet, if you'll indulge me. Our virtual band has been secretly writing new music as a follow-up to our game. So now you have to listen to it. This is an unreleased song for 60 seconds that we haven't signed to a new label yet. So I can play it wherever I want.
Do we kiss or do I run through the smoke and the mirrors? May the great disappearer watch me fooling everyone in invisible fear, scared of letting you near. Can you see me? Now you see me. Here is the prestige. I glimmer like a god. I am everything I'm not.
The lectern says no notes because I don't have any notes in here, but I like that it says no notes because I always have a lot of notes. Let's continue. Okay, so there are 4 periods of time that speak to me most strongly about our main subject today of time. So it's 2012 now, and I'm starting my first indie studio, Rad Dragon. We lasted about a year and a half, and in that time we shipped 4 games for iPhones. It was a crash course in keeping game design small and learning that shipping games sucks. It's so bad. Shipping is boring and hard, and doing it makes you very special. But like I said earlier, we're going to focus on the ways I spent my time outside of game making. In this time, I went to every games event that I could. Mike and I had some interesting ideas, we thought, and our goal was to leverage experience from a bunch of small releases to get funding for something bigger, you know. So I networked. You all know something about this because you're a GCAP, and you were probably tired because it's like 10, and game dev time, it feels like it's 6 for me. But you're here, and you're spending time away from your projects and your routines to build relationships and maybe get some fresh ideas. I was trying to get work out there, right? I was meeting reps at publishers and consoles for the first time. Of the dozens and dozens of pitches we did in our first year, none of them got us any deals. But I learned how to pitch, I think. Here are 2 quick tips I still keep in mind today when I pitch from this period. Oh, is that small? Control the audio. Control the audio. Sorry, audio tip. You're gonna pitch in some terrible places. A hotel lobby, a loud Starbucks right next to the blenders, in the middle of a party. So it's natural to accept that audio shouldn't be a foundational part of your pitch, but however you can, try and take control of your audio environment. The strongest response we ever got from a pitch was when I got so sick of bad sound that for a pitch in Devolver Digital's E3 trailer, I brought a suitcase full of speakers and a giant subwoofer and like plugged it all in. And they were like, wow, bass. I was like, yeah, we did that. If you don't want to be ridiculous like that, you can invest in some good noise canceling headphones and gently ask if your pitch contact is willing to wear them and keep them sanitized. 2, know what you're asking. I just wasted a lot of time doing open-ended pitches, demoing a prototype to a publisher and then being like, what do you think? And what this gets you is soft answers and no commitments. I'm not suggesting you be pushy. Like, I'm personally uncomfortable being pushy, but I do suggest that you go into a pitch knowing what ideally you'd like the other party to do for you and what you're offering them. Okay, pitch tips over. The other thing I was doing was Glitch City, LA. During the 18 months of this first studio, I was working from my bedroom. And as I went around to events in my hometown of LA, I learned that so were a lot of other indies. So about a dozen of us gathered our humble resources and rented a small office space. We called ourselves Glitch City, LA, an independent games collective. Glitch has been operating a physical workspace and community event space for over 11 years now. This took time. Right? In its beginnings, I sat on the 4-person leadership board for about 3 years. We threw events. We handled interpersonal issues. We recruited more members into the space. We dealt with finding a new space when our lease expired. There's no money in doing that sort of work, but we spent the time so that we could not be alone. I spent a lot of time mitigating the solitary nature of game development. We work in teams, but like most of us spend a career sitting at a computer most of the time. So it takes effort on top of your work to make sure you're communicating with your team and just communicating with anyone. In return for my time, this is us cleaning the mattresses. Not the mattresses, there was no mattresses. The sofa cushions. But in return for my time, I was surrounded day and night with like-minded friends, each working on their own wild ideas. After 18 months of running Rad Dragon, we ran out of money. Our 4 mobile games didn't turn a profit, so we stayed in business by doing occasional design consulting and slowly burning our remaining student loans. So we went our separate ways to try and make money, and we never reunited. I lost my first indie team, I learned a lot, and I started over. The same week my studio closed down, my fellow Glitch City co-founder Alex Preston had just launched a Kickstarter for Hyper Light Drifter, a little 6-month action RPG project he wanted to make with our friend Bo Blythe, the creator of Samurai Gun. The Kickstarter had just begun to get traction on day 1, so on day 2 I joined them, and I informed Alex that this game was absolutely not going to take 6 months. We learn. We were very lucky as a team, not just because our Kickstarter had 24,000 backers, but because we complemented each other very well. We each had specialties and we respected each other for them. So while we discussed a lot of the game as a team, we had a high level of mutual trust that each person was owning their specialties in the game. We were also each pretty comfortable calling bullshit on someone who overstepped. But again, I want to focus on what was happening outside of game development, so what else took our time? Demos. We were going to a lot of events, but now we were using those events to help structure our game production. For the first half of our 2.5-year production, every one of our milestones were focused on preparing builds to show at a PAX, an E3, even the Minecraft convention, which RIP Minecraft convention. Maybe. For one demo, I spent a couple weeks rapidly porting our game to the Vita. And because PlayStation offered us a Vita station at their E3 booth that year, they were like, do you have a Vita build? And we were like, yeah, we do. The lead engineer of our game, the lead engineer of the game engine, of GameMaker, flew to LA from Scotland to sit down with me and solve porting problems, since we were becoming a very large game that was pushing the boundaries of GameMaker Studio One. I guess I'm cheating here and I'm kind of talking about game dev, but you can see how this was very much a tangent from the journey of making the game itself. Speaking of tangents, I'll keep this quick. I've never told this story on stage before, and I'm going to skip a lot of details, but this definitely took up a bunch of time and attention. In the frenzy of our Kickstarter, we were approached by Kanye West. Thanks, everybody. Who wanted to talk about making music for the game. I know. Someone in his inner circle had shown him our Kickstarter, and he was like, this reminds me of Akira, which I guess is his favorite anime or something. So we spent a few days coordinating with his assistant and totally unsure whether we were being scammed, and then we spent the day at Kanye's house. We were like, where is it? There was no posted address, and I was like, maybe we should ask that guy in the monster truck with the engine running. This was 2014, so I should caveat that there were a lot of things about Kanye we didn't know at the time. But we learned that day. It was exciting and confounding and a little scary, but inarguably memorable. I have better photos, but I think it's unkind to show them. This was a huge, exciting distraction. It made no sense for us to collab with Kanye because we were already lucky to be working with Disasterpiece, aka Rich Vreeland, who had done the Fez soundtrack. It became pretty clear quickly that there were too many unknowns in making our project dependent on a superstar. That being said, I think this little diversion was worth it. In retrospect, we condense our time down into these special memories, some beautiful, some horrible, but they are a record of our lives. And I don't want to specifically hype up Kanye West right now, but what I'm trying to say is that sometimes it's worth burning time chasing a distraction for the experience, for the memories. Does that make sense? Does that sound smart? Let's move on from Kanye. Throughout the development of Hyperlight, I and others kept up side projects. I think this was our way of adapting to such a big indie project for us. We were a collection of very different artists, and we each needed to preserve our individual creative outlets to sustain ourselves. Bo worked on releasing Samurai Gun. I worked on a couple side projects. Kyoto Wild was a multiplayer weapons brawler that I worked on for a long time. It was a game I could take around to events and put on a screen and watch a bunch of people fight and giggle. Party games are really rewarding to make in this way, and it was re-energizing for me. Ultimately, I put aside Kyoto Wild to focus on Hyperlight's release. Also, it was appropriative because, you know, it's Japan. I recorded a limited run 12-episode podcast called Playscape LA as part of the Idle Thumbs network. This was my love letter to the game making community in LA, and it gave me a space from working on Hyperlight to speak with some of my dear friends across disciplines. Ashley Birch, Zoe Quinn, Brendan Chung, Austin Wintory, a bunch of dear LA people. I used this podcast as a way to document how I was feeling as we approached the release of Hyperlight, which felt like a worthwhile use of some of my downtime. It is important for me to acknowledge here that during this time in my life, I was very embedded in my community day and night. My personal life revolved around it in a way that was extreme. This kind of all-in lifestyle can contribute to burnout at the same time that it's fueling you. But I needed all these projects and community events at this time. I was going through a divorce in my private life, and a lot of my world outside of my games friendships was shifting and changing. I guess I just don't want to stand up here and make anyone feel like the solution to feeling tired from game dev is to do more game dev and record a podcast about game dev. I say as I'm giving a talk about game dev. After we released Hyperlight Drifter, the first 4 team members each went our separate ways, and only Alex carried on to grow his company Heart Machine into a new thing. Our collaboration was a brief moment in time. It was an intersection of creative interests from people whose roads were taking them in different directions. Bo wanted to make smaller games. Alex wanted to make much bigger games. Casey Hunt wanted space away from games entirely. He's the one in the background kind of holding his head, being like, I need space from games entirely. I wanted to explore projects for my sake that spoke more to my worldview than Hyperlight did. So I started over. As we were finishing Hyperlight, I met the leads of Square Enix Montreal. I'm a shameless 90s Squaresoft fan, so when they offered me the job of sole creative director at the studio and the chance to work on a new IP, I packed up my whole life and I moved to Canada. As you might imagine, moving countries takes up a lot of time, saying goodbye to friends, the actual process of moving, getting settled, and once again, going to as many events as I could to rebuild community. I came to appreciate the years of time it takes to rebuild that. I also had to build a new team. This was my first experience as the hiring manager. I hired every role for this team. It took so much time and focus that in order to finally hire key roles, I had to take a week away from the studio entirely, just like turn my phone off and go conduct interviews and send emails. And I do love building a team because to me, that's the same thing as defining a project. I want teams where each member is empowered to shape a piece of the whole, and it's exhilarating to see how each person evolves the game. Since I can't legally talk much about this game, this is a perfect moment to highlight people and how important it is to curate whom you'll spend your time with. In fact, across my entire career, all of my major project choices have been about whom I get to work with more than what I get to work on. My fandom for Final Fantasy played a huge part in me deciding to go to Square Enix, but also I knew I'd be teaming up with Renaud Bedard, who was the co-creator of Fez. We each accepted our roles in the company in parallel with the understanding that we would form a team together. Renaud's a brilliant programmer and an absolute delight. And ultimately, after 2 years, our project was canceled. Due to a sudden shift in the Square Enix West strategy across studios. Our game was no longer compatible with the goals of corporate, and so it vanished. I wish I could show you what we made. My fellow game maker and friend David O'Reilly told me at the time of cancellation that this was a violent act, the destruction of work, and it kind of felt that way. I'm sure more than a few of you have experienced the loss of a project, and I wish I could show you ours with some of the work that, I wish like some of the work had seen the light of the day. And fortunately for me, it did. Over the years, some of the visual development of our game was released to the public, and I've waited for a couple years to say anything about it personally. So while I can't add anything to what's already on the internet, I can show you what's on the internet that's totally public-facing from our original project at Square Enix. I am very proud of what we were making. I was heartbroken and angry at the death of our work together. I had asked this group of kind, talented artists to join me. Some of them even moved to Montreal for it, uprooting their lives for the work. Thankfully, not a single team member lost their job in the cancellation, and I stayed around the studio long enough to see them each placed in new projects. On my road to recovering from this cancellation, I took solace in learning that the time we spent on creative work is durable, and it outlasts individual games. And I've watched over the last 7 years since we lost this game as my team members all left the studio to do different work, and I got to see how our inspirations and our voices lived on in a patchwork of what we each made. A company can lock up specific work behind NDAs, but they cannot NDA an artist's natural talents, styles, and influences. Or at least, I hope to God their lawyers don't try. We as human beings carry on, and our time wasn't fully wasted or destroyed, I think. After I left Square, I became nomadic for a time. I licked my wounds. Eventually, I met the founders of indie games fund Kowloon Knights, who invested in a new team. Once again, I set out to build a project around people, this time from friends of mine in music. Producer and artist manager Michaela Foote helped me to build the team around LA's incredible pop music community. We recruited songwriters Luna Shadows and Tom Powers from the New Zealand band The Naked and Famous, and my longtime friend and composer Omniboy. So in this chapter, I want to cheat our time theme a little bit by talking about actual game dev, because part of my goal with OFK was to take my work life away from the computer. From animated TV series, I took the idea that a showrunner can also become a performer. If you look at shows like Adventure Time or Family Guy or Steven Universe or like a lot of animated series, you'll see it's commonly accepted that show creators often voice characters. So I spoke candidly with the songwriters and our casting director about whether they'd be comfortable with me playing a character in the game. This also meant that I needed to get back into vocal training, a practice I had done religiously from high school well into my 20s, and since I knew I would get to work with professional pop musicians, I felt a responsibility to be in good vocal health. This meant hour-long sessions once a week for 2 years leading up to the game's release and the final song recordings. I built a recording booth in my home closet so that my vocal coach could hear me properly during the remote lessons that COVID demanded. We also put tremendous effort into character development, like more than I normally would, knowing that these characters would not just star in the game, but reach beyond that scope to ultimately stream on Twitch and perform live. We were doing some kind of early VTuber stuff.
How have you felt kind of seeing the story play out from week to week, and we're coming up on the finale very shortly?
It's embarrassing. I mean, like, there's a lot of personal stuff in there for all of us, and the writing team did a good job of working with us to make sure that, like, they weren't sharing anything that was too private or shit that we hadn't kind of dealt with. So it's a little weird.
Do you think that this really opens the door for other artists to get their music out through a video game medium specifically?
Yes, I would love to put all my music out through games only, but you know what that would mean.
So yeah, but in designing this project, in our goal to be playable by as many fans of our music as possible, we shaped the game design more and more on doing less and less, to be truly playable by anyone in a way that pushed the format of what some people consider a game, I guess. And in the process, my work as a game designer looked less like it did on the action games I like to make, like Hyperlight, and more like the job of a video editor. So while I spent the first 2 years of OFK writing scripts and acting and singing and recording alongside my normal game directing, most of my time in the final 2 years was spent on very linear work. This work didn't fit me well, and I struggled, and things reached a point late in production where I wish I could replace myself. Even though we were far too deep into doing something so drastic, I think. When you're the director, your responsibility to your team is to carry their spent time in your hands and usher it to the release of a game. There are, of course, limits to that, and I don't want to see others push themselves too far, but I do feel that it was a sense of responsibility almost alone that carried me across the last 2 years of OFK. I've been slowly learning one crucial lesson across my whole career. How do you discern the difference between what you want to have made and what you want to be making? For OFK, I got to be a pop music recording artist. It's really a dream for a theatrical nerd like me. But to do so, I ended up becoming a video editor for 2 years, which is a craft that I admire, but is extremely not fitting for me. And the time math here, it gets baffling. Like, as game developers, we're used to thinking about how long it will take to make a game, but I think that it's worth evaluating how long will you be doing the work that piques your curiosity. How long might it take you to recover from the creation of this? Obviously, we can't expect every moment of game dev to be fulfilling, but it's up to you to be honest with yourself about each job you take on and how you'll be spending your time. Slowly iterating on a type of work that gives you the most joy and brings the best out of you. Sometimes on OFK, I felt like I'd missed that mark, and I strayed from my roots in system-focused game design, and I let myself get sequestered in a weird video game social experiment that created some distance between me and my community. But it was fun, and some great fruits came from it. We did get to take our virtual band on the road, which was part of the original goal. Here's a little bit of our show at PAX last year. We played for like 2,000 people, and were produced by our music director, Dejan Martineau, who's incredible.
Yeah, let's ruin our night. Who here's sad?
So I cry. And I
Whatever, that's just more me on a stage. Oh, we got a Peabody Award, which is like one of the oldest American media honors, predating even the Emmy Awards. So I don't know, like awards are weird, and there's an award show happening this week, and if you want to talk with me about awards after the show, that's a whole separate talk, because there's baggage there. All in all, I spent 4.5 years on OFK, and then 1 year in recovery. So, okay, please hear me. I know that it sounds like I've just complained a bunch about a great string of good fortune, and what I mean to highlight is that when you consider a project, it is worth factoring in the shape of the production and which tasks you're committing your time to within a larger whole. At the end of the creation of OFK, my professional life felt as though it started over again. We designed the production budget of OFK to enable us to collaborate with people who prefer freelance work. So it opened us up to special collaborations we couldn't have done otherwise, but that meant that as the production wrapped up, so did each collaborator. At peak size, we were nearly 20 people, and at release, we were 2. Like the parting of the Hyperlight team or my departure from Square, I felt the reset heavy on my chest. For the past year, after taking nearly a year away from game development, I've been back at it, prototyping and returning to my roots in action games, newly informed by some of our media experimentation in OFK. I am rediscovering what I love about game design, what being very careful about the size of what I set out to make means. I used to pick projects based on this feeling of need, and I'd ask myself, do I need this to exist? And I'd tell other people, like, you gotta need it, because for sure, the job of making and finishing a game is punishing, and it helps if your motivation comes from your heart, but need is a dangerous thing. It is compulsive, and it's often not up to us what happens to our work. These days, instead, I'm trying to think about having to find yourself within your curiosity. Being playful, lowering the pressure on yourself, and seeing what ideas or opportunities stick in your head. Discover how they stick to pieces of you, maybe things you loved as a child, or a pet that you had, or a donut that you ate, a vacation you went on. You don't have to start a project fully formed knowing exactly what you will love about it. You just have to want to find out. One of the most satisfying notes I've ever received came when we revealed OFK at the Game Awards. My friend who didn't know about the project or that we were revealing it said, I knew that game was your team as soon as I saw it. It felt like you all. And as I've said today, a game should be shaped by the people who lend their voices to it. So to me, that was like the highest compliment. So yeah, use your time to be curious. Be deeply curious about your subject matter, about your own instincts, about how you respond to different types of work. To start finding the work you'll make next, you don't need to know how a game will be special to you yet. Personally, more than ever before, I'm striving for continuity. A feeling that all these moments of starting over are in fact stepping stones across the stream. Canceled projects live on in next steps. What we love from old teams informs how we treat our new ones. What harmed us in a past game, we plan to prevent. When I feel a continuity of time across my life, well, all this life makes a little more sense. It helps me to see the time and to come to understand who I am with the help of the game makers around me. And that's it. Thank you. And now I'm going to pick 4 people to bring up here and drink water as fast as they can. Do we have time for questions? Okay. Do we just like
sprint around?
You said, hi, really cool talk, thanks. You said that you showed some really cool images on that cancelled project. What do I have to Google to find these images? Because I would love to find them later. Because you found them on the internet.
I did at that. Let me say this: they have come out from a number of places, and the images I showed have come out in different ways. So I will say 2 things you could look at that do not implicate those people. Quentin Bayot, find me afterwards. He was our art director, and Sarah Gonzalez, who was our concept artist, were both able to share some of the work that you saw.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Stupid question, but will you sign my copy of Hyperlight Drifter? It was the first Kickstarter I ever backed.
At what tier? That was unkind, thank you.
Enough to get a physical copy and early access.
Okay.
I think it was like $100 Australian, and I was a broke uni student, but I was like, fuck it, this game looks awesome.
Thank you. Oh, yes is the answer, I'm sorry. Instead of being an asshole, I should answer your question. Yeah.
What was your journey like, kind of rediscovering the importance of curiosity as a driver for your process? It's a big question, I guess.
Yeah, I was afforded the time to think about it because of burnout and the fact that I was just like genuinely afraid of game engines for a while. I think it was sort of like it had to fill a hole, and the hole was that in the past I had just like, there'd just always been something. There's been something that's like, oh, this is going to be the thing, like, you know, overconfidence. And so in the absence of that feeling, I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, I like Unity, I guess, you know, and like, I don't know, a plugin. And so I felt as though like through the process of starting to explore random ideas, you start to kind of just be like, ooh, this is sticking, right? Like I don't trust new ideas usually. I usually like take notes and make a doc and then ignore it. And then the things that stick to me, that feels like curiosity, right? If it's just like, oh, I keep coming back to this, like, right? This is my shower thoughts go here all the time, or when I take a walk, right? It's a very like, let the brain show you what it's going to keep thinking about and what has legs. That's maybe the best way I could put it. Thank you. Unreal is also good. I saw Unreal as a sponsor. Thank you, Unreal.
Thank you. Yeah. Hi. In your talk, there's, you know, you're talking about cycles, and there's personal cycles, and there's also these broader industrials and systemic cycles. And I'm wondering, like, when you think about that, like, how do you reconcile things inside your life versus external forces?
Say more.
So, like, at the moment, the Australian games industry is rebuilding itself. You know, the indie scene is starting, and there is, you know, when you're thinking of your personal development and your personal growth during your career, how do you see the way that you've grown reflected in the industry, or the way that the industry has changed affecting how you've grown?
Good. I don't know. I mean, I like, not to be grim, right? But like, technically speaking, I've been unemployed for 2 years because we released OFK and then burnout and now working on things. Like, the best I can say is that there's an undercurrent of everything I just said that is like very based on opportunities. Like, very rarely have I just been like, this is what I'm going to do, and then I'm just going to like build a road for it. Usually there was something that was an early hook, right? Like the Square Enix thing was a job offer, but like the Hyperlight team was like a coincidence of Kickstarter, and OFK was like, I met these people who were looking to fund stuff, and I guess that all is to say, like, I don't think that it is within my capability and within the responsible capability of most people to speak with confidence about what's happening in the industry in a matter of a few minutes. Like, everyone's circumstances are different. Each city is dealing with it differently. And I think, like, it's bad this year, and we're all hoping it gets better. But, like, I can't operate at that macro scale. I'm like, I don't think that, like, I'm going to be like, you know what, whenever someone says the future is blank, I just completely shut down. Like, remember when the iPad was going to be the console killer? I do. I remember when we announced for OOYA, which is not, with respect to OOYA. Or they're not a sponsor, okay. Yeah, sorry, that's what I...
You were talking earlier about how you felt like you went too deep into like the community, and that was kind of driving burnout in a way. And so, like, how do you like kind of balance that? How do you make sure you don't kind of go too far and it's like consumes your whole life whilst also still like moving things forward?
Like, this is kind of similar to the last question to me in the sense of like, or my answer is similar in the sense of like introspection and care, right? Like, because it's funny, like, I should have burnt out during Hyperlight and I didn't really. Like, maybe I was like composing the groundwork of a fun burnout that would bloom years later. I'm mixing metaphors, but like, that's what I needed at that time, and it was actually kind of good for me. And I spent a lot of time defending it at that time because I was like doing a lot and giving talks and juggling a lot, and I was like, I'm not burning out, I swear. And I still don't think that maybe I was, but like, then with OFK, it did burn me out. Yeah. And it's like, it's just contextual around like, what do you need and what are you neglecting, or what opportunities, what space are you not making? And I think just like finding a way to think and make space, whatever that means, which is a whole different talk as well. Is
so basically, if you feel okay with it, keep going, right?
Yeah, I guess. Well, yeah, or like, if too many people are like, hey, you okay? Then like, maybe that's the answer. Is that,
fair enough.
I don't know. Yeah.
Hi. I was just wondering, along your career, because you started quite a few years ago, did you have like I'm 33, I feel your pain. Did you have like a magnum opus or something that throughout your choices you wanted to work towards making or giving to the gaming sphere?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So two things about that. Like, I have one thing that I feel. I mean, magnum opus is a big word, but like, yeah. 2 words. Like, like there was one thing for me which was like music and games. Like, I had a music background, and so I was like, oh, like this is gonna be my thing. And when I was in grad school, I was doing all these like reactive music prototypes and stuff, and I was like, this is gonna be my lane. And then like I kind of crumbled under the pressure of that, and I didn't work on a music game for a while because I was like, I'm not ready for this to do it right, I was just talking with a friend about this recently, about like, do you make the thing that's like your dream, you know, and suffer the weight of your expectations, or do you make something smaller first, or do you just say, let's do both, right? Like, let's just make the dream smaller or whatever. So I had those, and that's kind of what I ultimately came back around to with OFK. I was like working on that project, and it was going to be this narrative thing, and then the story was coalescing, and they needed something, the characters needed something they were going to be working on, and I was like, they could be like, I'm not going to have them making a game because I don't want to do that, but like, we could do music, and then, you know, it after that fell together. But as a counterpoint, like now when I'm prototyping and I'm coming out of burnout and I'm feeling like I did the thing, like I'm done, right? Is this my like post-mortem of my life talk? I'm coming more from a place of like, I don't have a thing in hand, but it is really fulfilling and exciting to start working on things and to see what sticks, like we were just talking about. And then to be like, oh, this is sticking because when I was 20, blank. Like, oh, I used to love this. Why don't I love this anymore? And that's why I'm curious about this. And so like, I'm retroactively finding things that are like the new, kind of like the fallacy of like, I've been making games since I was 3, and I always knew that like, my first words were Hyperlight Drifter. And like, you do kind of make those connections backwards, and I don't mean to poo-poo that stuff. Like, that is really beautiful to make those ties and be like, I was doing that. Like, I did actually draw level maps on crayon or whatever, but like, they were bad. So yeah, I think like there can be the kind of like the dream, and then if you don't have it, it'll find you maybe.
Yeah.
I hope.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Time for 2 more
Okay.
Hiya, thank you. In the kind of spirit of financial transparency you brought up earlier, I just kind of wanted to know your maybe knee-jerk reaction to the differences between Kickstarter and kind of what at least looks on the outside as being a semi-no-strings publisher like Kowloon.
What's the difference?
Or is there something kind of pros and cons maybe of either or?
Sure. It is a little difficult because the scenarios are so like, there's too many variables that were different between my experiences there. And similarly to like broad scope industry advice, I'm always reticent to be like, let me tell you about Kickstarter from my experiences a decade ago that are like obviously not relevant. I mean, you are beholden to someone for something, right? And like, I think in both cases, like there is a laundry list to be made of what are you promising and what are you kind of stuck with, you know? Like there are many clauses in Kickstarter, I think still about like accountability, right? Like I don't think you can be like sued if you don't finish the game or whatever by backers. But hopefully it's not getting to that and you still feel responsible. Like we put so much pressure on ourselves in Hyperlight because there was a mech in the Kickstarter trailer. Oh my God, and you get in the mech and the mech goes boop, 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 and like shoots a little laser and a door melts. And like everything in that trailer, so fake. When I got my hands on the build, sorry, this is a tangent, like when I joined on day 2 and I found that the build was like, these are just beautiful pieces of art that a character is running across and there's no collision and there's no platforming and it's all fake. I was like, oh, that was smart. But so you're beholden in those ways, right? Or like a common pitfall in Kickstarter is the rewards, and especially physical rewards. A lot of Kickstarter founders like bankrupt themselves because they didn't do the math conservatively enough on production costs and shipping costs and stuff. Kowloon is not actually a publisher; they are a funding entity. So like that came with the baggage of. We had already given % away to this investor, and so it was like prohibitive to getting a publisher, which in retrospect I would have done. Maybe the simplest way to answer and conclude this rant is to say like, I am still uncertain of that for my next project. Like I am beginning the process of trying to find money to work a little larger, and I'm like 50-50. I think like I would look at the landscape for both. Like that's the unfun answer, right? Is like, I don't know how well game Kickstarters are doing these days. Everyone knows how grim the funding landscape is on the publisher side, but like, I don't know, we should talk about it after because I think I'm losing the thread, but they're both valid, right? So is Patreon, I think. You know.
Hello.
Hi.
Wonderful talk. I wanted to ask, so you had a point before when you said you like make the team to make the game. So like your team sort of informs what the game is. What do you do, or how would you approach when that idea that sticks in your head in the shower or whatever doesn't mesh with the team that you've built? Do you know what I mean?
I guess it depends on how that conflict arises, right? Like when I was building, for example, the OFK team, I was giving them as much information as I could about what they were joining on for in terms of like the core dreams of the thing, right? So they knew like, hey, if we're aligned on this, let's start there and we can disagree about all the other stuff. I think in a different scenario where like you're working with a team already and you all are picking a new project and you've got a dream and there's a conflict of interest, like obviously it depends on the power dynamic. Like side note that like I think there is no getting around sole company ownership, and is a thing I want to do differently next time, because OFK was a very like we like to think delegation of ownership project. Like we were really like everyone gets to decide how this art department owns art, et cetera, but I owned that company, and like the bill keeps coming due. Like everything gets funneled through the person who owns a company, and it still makes me very upset that a lot of like diversity initiatives and indie initiatives don't check to see who actually has the power in some of these studios that are getting funding, right? That's why you start to see a lot of people like putting a photo up of the team and being like, look, diversity, but like, man, maybe someone like this is like the person who gets to make the choices. A lot of long answers. I guess what I'm saying is like, if y'all joined before you came to an agreement about that, then that is something that you have to negotiate and to try to find middle ground on, or like I would suggest that you do that.
Awesome, thank you.
We have time for one more.
Okay.
So I've had projects that are 1 month, 2 month, 9 months long, longest. And the worst case scenario I could ever imagine was that 9 month project being taken away from me. I can't show it to anyone ever, and it's gone and becomes nothing. Do you have any advice for how, after 2 years, and that you went through that, how did you pull yourself back up and you move on?
Yeah. I mean, I think with the Square Enix thing, like I left, my first solution to that was to leave. I was like, I don't trust y'all anymore. Without getting into details, the way that it happened was just like not the proper procedure, and it upset a lot of my team, and I like was very angry for them. So part of it is like, whatever took your work away, right? Like, are you free? Like, have you solved that problem of why that happened? If it was taken forcibly or something, right? If you just run out of money, that's a different problem to have to wrestle with. In terms of motivation, I think like, I think there is kind of like the understanding that like, man, you're not as, the best and worst thing is that like, you're just not as interesting as you think you are. And like, and I mean me, I'm not as interesting as I think I are. That like you're gonna keep revisiting the same stuff, I think. Like even if you change genres or whatever, like you're gonna end up revisiting that thing that got canceled or that you didn't get to make. You're gonna find out later that you're making half of that in something else. And that's like very encouraging and healing to me to find like I was saying, like it's very different. It's actually very difficult for them to take the work. Like it comes back, and that's like kind of all you can do is trust that.
Thank you.
You can stand up here if you want.
Okay.
Ta-da! There we go. Actually, I did not know that you could do this. Just like... Yippee! Thank you so much, Teddy, and thank you all for attending and your wonderful questions. Morning tea is actually about to be served, so please head out, fuel up for your day, and we'll see you back here tonight to see Carrie shower.